You know what this house costs? Not just the mortgage. The cost of standing here alone, watching the Pacific from a floor-to-ceiling window that reflects back nothing but a gray, tired face. 55. I've spent 30 years stacking achievements, corner office, six-figure clothes, a husband who was a walking Forbes profile. I got exactly what I worked for, and now I'm bankrupt. Not financially, emotionally. You click on a video titled like this because you're probably still weighing the scale, aren't you? You're dating the brilliant, charming wreck, but the quiet guy who brings you coffee is waiting on the sideline. Let me tell you how that trade-off actually plays out past the age of 40. I married Robert because he was a headline. He was the CEO, the power. I thought kindness was something weak people looked for, a consolation prize. I wanted perfection, a partner who elevated my social stock instantly. Now, the silence in this 1,000-square-foot kitchen is the sound of my greatest professional mistake, played out personally. I built a monument to status, and now I just want a single warm hand to hold. I'll show you the exact moment I signed the internal contract for this failure and who I sacrificed to get here. The year was 1998. I was 27, fresh out of the MBA program, hungry, wearing a suit that cost 2 months' rent. I had two men orbiting me. There was Robert, then 32, already VP of M&A. He drove a black German sedan that smelled like leather and ambition. He was articulate, ruthless, and gorgeous in that sharp-jawed, tailored way. Dating Robert felt like skipping 3 rungs up the corporate ladder instantly. Every dinner was a strategy meeting disguised as romance. He told me I was the only woman who understood the game. Then there was David. David was a high school history teacher. He lived in a noisy brownstone in a neighborhood that hadn't been gentrified yet. He wore corduroy, smelled faintly of old paper and coffee, and spent his weekends volunteering at an animal shelter. When David looked at me, he didn't see my potential salary. He saw me. He asked about my childhood, not my Q3 projections. One night, Robert had canceled on a Saturday for the 3rd time, a critical board meeting, and David showed up with cheap takeout Thai food and a battered copy of The Great Gatsby. We sat on my dingy couch, and he just listened, really listened. Robert offered me a future. David offered me now. I chose the future. I told myself David was nice, but nice doesn't pay for the penthouse view. The integration of Robert into my life wasn't messy, it was surgical. He fit the spreadsheet perfectly. We married 2 years later. The wedding wasn't about us. It was a networking event disguised as a white dress party. The biggest problem with choosing a perfect partner is that their perfection is often focused outwards, designed for public consumption. Behind the heavy oak door of our first house, the performance dropped. Robert treated our shared life like another division he managed. He delegated the chores, outsourced the emotional labor, and timed the intimacy. When I tried to talk about feeling lonely, he pulled out his phone, scrolled through his calendar, and said, "We budgeted 15 minutes tonight. Is this going to take longer?" His lack of kindness wasn't malice. It was just severe, profound indifference to anything that didn't generate ROI. I remember once I had the flu, miserable, shivering under 3 blankets. Robert walked in, saw me, adjusted the thermostat down 2 degrees because he runs hot, and asked if I'd remembered to send his assistant the quarterly tax documents. He saw my illness not as a source of discomfort for me, but as a temporary, irritating inefficiency in his support structure. That was the first true obstacle, realizing the man I'd chosen viewed my welfare as a logistical issue. The complexity deepened as we both moved into our 30s, and the trophy couple narrative started requiring more maintenance. We had children, 2 beautiful, high-achieving girls. Robert was a fantastic father on paper. He funded their education, attended the mandatory school functions, and made sure they understood the importance of networking. But when one of our daughters, Sarah, struggled with anxiety in middle school, needing quiet reassurance and patience, Robert's approach was disastrous. He analyzed her mental health like a broken marketing plan. "What's the source of the failure?" he'd demand, completely missing the fear in her eyes. It was always about fixing the output, never tending to the human input. Meanwhile, I was running my own high-stress career. I started absorbing all the emotional debt Robert refused to touch. I became the designated soft parent, the buffer, the person who made sure the house felt like a home and not a luxury consulting firm. Robert saw this unequal division of labor as proof of my superior emotional intelligence, which was just corporate speak for better at sacrificing myself. The subtrauma was the slow, acidic erosion of my self-worth, disguised as marital stability. I was constantly performing kindness, never receiving it. I used my growing salary to buy bigger things to fill the silent, echoing gaps between us. The midpoint arrived with a blunt, terrible force. I was 42. My father, the kindest man I ever knew, suffered a massive, sudden stroke. I dropped everything. Work, meetings, everything, and flew across the country. I spent a week sleeping on a vinyl chair in the ICU, the smell of sanitizer and fear clinging to my clothes. Robert called once, maybe twice, asking how soon I'd be back to handle the caterer booking for his charity gala. He didn't ask how I was. He treated my grief as an inconvenience. But then, a few days in, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. It was David. He had seen my father's obituary notice in the local paper. He didn't send flowers or a formal condolence email. He just called and said, "I remember your dad always told the worst jokes. Can you tell me one of them? We could use a bad joke right now." He wasn't trying to fix it. He was just sitting with the pain. We talked for an hour about nothing and everything. When I hung up, the crushing weight in my chest eased slightly. That was the great reveal. David, the man I discarded for being too soft, had instinctively given me the exact emotional currency I was starving for. Robert, the man I chose for his strength, only offered performance reviews. I realized in that sterile hospital room that I had mistaken ruthlessness for strength and gentleness for weakness. The consequences of that phone call didn't explode. They seeped into the marriage like slow poison. I couldn't unsee the contrast. Robert was still brilliant, still successful, still the perfect profile. But now, his perfection looked like a sterile mask. I started noticing the small, constant deficits. If I was driving and got lost, Robert wouldn't help navigate. He'd just sigh heavily, a sound that felt like sandpaper on my nerves. If I achieved something big at work, his praise was always qualified. Good. Now make sure you leverage that for the next step. Never just a simple, "I'm proud of you." I called David occasionally, always about some neutral topic, history, politics, sometimes just to ask about the dog he adopted. Those conversations were my escape hatch, a tiny window of genuine human warmth. I never cheated. I didn't need sex. I needed oxygen. The more I talked to David, the more unbearable Robert became. The money, the status, the high-end vacations, they stopped tasting like victory and started tasting like insulation, trapping me in a gilded cage. I realized the true horror. Robert hadn't failed me. He had simply delivered exactly what I asked for, success without humanity. I tried to fix it, of course. That was my false hope phase. I thought, maybe he just needs coaching. I told Robert, "I need more emotional connection. We need to talk about feelings, not just futures." He responded by scheduling a weekly relationship strategy session in our shared Outlook calendar. He arrived at the first session with a printed list of bullet points. 1. Identify areas of perceived dissatisfaction. 2. Establish metrics for emotional support. I asked him, genuinely, what he loved about me. He paused, looked at his list, and said, "You are a highly efficient co-pilot who stabilizes my brand image and manages the family logistics flawlessly." I pushed back, fighting the urge to scream. I said, "No, what about me, the person?" He blinked, genuinely confused. "You are functionally optimal," he concluded. That's when the hope died. I realized this wasn't a communication gap. This was a fundamental operating system incompatibility. Robert wasn't intentionally cruel. He simply lacked the necessary hardware for genuine empathy. He was a flawless machine, incapable of warmth. I briefly entertained the idea of leaving right then, picturing a modest apartment, maybe near David's brownstone. But the sheer weight of 30 years of shared assets, the children's university funds, the reputation, it was paralyzing. I chose to stay, banking on the idea that financial security was enough comfort. It was the worst bet of my life. The crisis hit when I was 50. Robert, after decades of aggressive, high-stakes maneuvering, was quietly forced out of his CEO position during a corporate restructuring. The market had changed, the rules of the game shifted, and his specific brand of relentless control was suddenly obsolete. He went from the top of the world to the couch overnight. This should have been the moment he humanized, the moment we finally huddled together against the cold reality of failure. Instead, his perfection crumbled into pure, toxic resentment. He couldn't manage the shame. He stopped showering. He drank too much expensive scotch. He turned his managerial intensity inward, criticizing every decision I made, every breath the children took. He became financially paranoid, demanding I justify every dollar spent, even though we had millions socked away. The external validation was gone, and without it, Robert had no personality structure left. He wasn't the flawless partner anymore. He was a terrified, petty man who had nothing but contempt for the domestic world he'd always ignored. The system, the corporate world we had both served, had counterattacked, and it left me trapped with the debris. A husband whose entire identity had just been decommissioned. I realized the true cost of perfection. It's too brittle to survive reality. I remember one cold Tuesday morning, standing in the marble shower, the water scalding my skin, and realizing I hadn't felt truly happy in over 2 decades. It was the night dark of the soul, the realization that I had fundamentally traded my emotional future for an excellent CV and a good view. I didn't regret the ambition, but I regretted the selection criteria. I had valued external metrics, power, influence, status, over the internal ones, patience, empathy, presence. Robert and I were now living in separate wings of the house, communicating only through terse notes about bills or the children. I was 52, successful by every outside measure, yet I felt like a poorly maintained antique, displayed in a museum where no one was allowed to touch it. I reflected hard on David. Where was he now? Happy, I suspected, probably grading papers and laughing over burnt toast. The pain wasn't that I missed David the man. The pain was realizing I had missed the life David represented. A life of simple, messy, human connection. A life where kindness was the currency, not the consolation prize. I looked at the diamond on my hand, a rock that cost more than David's entire annual salary, and saw not wealth, but a heavy, sparkling shackle. I had paid too much for the perfect cage. I filed for divorce. The climax wasn't a shouting match, it was clinical. Robert fought dirty, using lawyers like corporate raiders, trying to minimize my share of the marital estate, even though my career had largely subsidized his failures in the last 5 years. He couldn't grasp the concept of an amicable split. He only understood zero-sum games. The final decree came through 2 years ago. I kept the house, the one with the spectacular, meaningless view, just to avoid the hassle of moving while the girls finished college. Robert moved to Florida, started dating a much younger woman who probably thinks his resume is his personality and is trying to rebuild his empire on a smaller scale. Good luck to her. The resolution of the conflict wasn't happiness, it was silence, broken only by the tide. One afternoon, feeling incredibly empty, I did something stupid. I looked up David. I found his profile. He was still teaching history, still in the same city, and he was married. The photos were the ultimate proof. His wife, smiling, slightly messy hair, wearing a comfortable sweater, standing beside him in front of a slightly peeling wooden fence. She wasn't polished. She wasn't a trophy. She looked genuinely happy, and more importantly, David looked seen. He hadn't chased perfection. He had found peace. The final, sharp realization, the real pulo do gato, was that David wasn't kind despite his lack of wealth, but maybe because of it. He had the space for humanity. Robert's perfection required constant, aggressive maintenance, leaving no emotional bandwidth for true kindness. Perfection demands performance. Kindness demands presence. When I was 27, I saw kindness as a passive trait. Now, at 55, I know it's an active choice, a necessary, difficult form of daily strength. It takes more character to sit quietly with someone's grief than to throw money at the problem. I realize now that David didn't just offer me coffee and listening ears, he offered me emotional stability, a non-negotiable asset that I stupidly classified as low value. I traded the chance to be genuinely supported for the assurance of being socially envied. And the kicker? Nobody envies the solitude. Nobody asks to see the receipts for the decades of emotional neglect. They just see the view. The view is nice, but when you cry, the glass is cold. The ultimate betrayal wasn't Robert's indifference. It was my own short-sightedness, my failure to understand that partnership is an infrastructure of empathy, not a display cabinet of achievements. I am still here. I'm 55, I have the wealth. The girls are successful, well-adjusted adults, mostly thanks to my efforts to counteract Robert's coldness. They come home often and they bring warmth. That's the bittersweet part. I achieved professional success and stability for them, but I paid for it with my own core happiness. I see now that being alone doesn't always mean having no one physically present. It means having no one who truly cares about the state of your interior life. I look out at that ocean and I try to find new metrics. I'm learning to be kind to myself now, something Robert never taught me, but David would have shown me instinctively. If you are watching this, still in your 20s or 30s, trying to decide between the high-octane achiever and the quiet, solid heart, stop calculating the net worth. Ask yourself this: when the corporate ladder collapses, when you're sick, or when you simply fail, which man will hand you a tissue and sit silently beside you? That man, the one who offers connection, not calculus, is the partner you need for the long haul. Choose the gentle strength. It's the only asset that appreciates over time. Don't make the mistake of valuing the headline over the hearth. Go build something quiet.